Hello, in this video we're going to graph functions where we do a vertical shift and a horizontal shift. So in this first example, y equals 2 minus cosine of 3x. I see that this 2 out front, if you recall, we've got that constant that's being added or subtracted. So a lot of times we like to rewrite that at the end. So if I move that to the end, I would rewrite this function as y equals, that negative is attached to the cosine. So that's a negative 1 cosine of 3x. And then that's a positive 2, so it's a plus 2. So I can see that's my value of c out here that I'm adding. And that's what tells me we have a vertical shift. So we're going to shift up 2 units, which means our midline is the line y equals 2. So we will use that location to go up and down to the max and min when we go to graph. All right, what else is going on here? Well, this negative out front is attached to a 1. So we know a is negative 1. Because it's negative, we know we are going to reflect about the x-axis. Okay, so cosine is going to be reflected. And the amplitude is 1. Every sine and cosine graph has an amplitude. It's 1. If it's a vertical stretch, then it's changed, but this one has not been stretched. Okay, the period is 2 pi unless there is a coefficient on x, which is our b value. So we know b is 3. So to find the period of this function, we take 2 pi, which is the period of cosine, and we divide it by 3. All right, because there is nothing being added or subtracted to the x, we say that we have no phase shift, which means our first cycle begins at x equals 0. All right, so what we need to do then is come up with the x coordinates of our 5 points. So we always start, our first x value is at the phase shift, which is 0, okay? And I like to find the last x value, so I know I'm in good shape when I divide it up into the 4 equal parts. So the last would be 0 plus the period. The period is 2 pi over 3. So the ending point in my cycle will have an x value of 2 pi over 3. All right, so now we need to divide up the cycle into 4 equal parts. So we will need a midpoint, and then we will have our quarter point and our 3/4 point. So if you're comfortable saying, okay, what's the midpoint between 0 and 2 pi over 3? You can always take half of 2 pi over 3, and that's your midpoint. If that doesn't work so well for you, you can always use the quarter period method. So divide the period into 4 equal parts and then add that consecutively. What is 1/4 of 2 pi over 3? Well, that becomes, I can divide out the 2, so that becomes pi over 6. So each of my 4 sections is pi over 6 units. So what I can do then is I can just add pi over 6 consecutively. All right, so I get pi over 6. Okay, then if I add another pi over 6, I have 2 pi over 6, which we should reduce, but I'm going to keep going and keep adding pi over 6. Then I have 3 pi over 6, and then I have 4 pi over 6. And when I reduce those fractions down, I have the x values of my 5 points. So 2 pi over 6 reduces to pi over 3, which is halfway between 0 and 2 pi over 3 is 1 pi over 3, or half of 2/3 is 1/3. And then 3 pi over 6 reduces to pi over 2. And I like to double check here, does 4 pi over 6 reduce to 2 pi over 3? Yes, it does. So I'm going to then make each square pi over 6. So it's 1 pi, we got pi over 6. Oh, whoops, I better do 2. I forgot, I don't have a lot of room to write. Try that again. So 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts. So 2 squares will represent pi over 6. So I have 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, which would be pi over 3, 3 pi over 6, which would be pi over 2, and 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. Okay, and now I'm not, I am shifting. Now I'm going to label my y-axis. So first place I go on my y-axis is to my midline, which is y equals 2. So I'm going to make each square be 2. All right, so this is my midline. So kind of keep in mind that this is where it's like my new x-axis. So the points that are on the midline will now be at y equals 2. So I'm going to go an amplitude, I'm going to go up 1 and down 1. And I'm going to mark those locations on my axis. So that would be up to 3 and down to 1. Okay, so my points, no points on the graph will be higher than 3 or lower than 1. And where do I start? At 0, okay? And this is cosine now. I have to think about reflecting. So cosine, remember, these are my 5 points. So instead of starting up at the max first, I'm going to start down at the min. Okay, so when I reflect, it's going to be this red graph. Okay? So I'm going to start the beginning of the cycle at 0, and I'll be down at the minimum, which is -1. At the quarter, pi over 6, I'm on the midline. At the midpoint, pi over 3, I'm at the max. 3/4 midline. At the end, I'm back down at the min. Oops, I just realized this should be 2 pi over 3. All right, and then I connect my curve. Connect my points and draw my curve. So that's the first cycle of the graph of this function. All right, now let's look at doing a horizontal shift or a phase shift. Okay, so I can see here that I have my A value is 3. Because it's positive, there is no reflection about the x-axis. The amplitude is 3, the absolute value of that. The coefficient on x is 1, so that tells me b is 1, which means the period is 2 pi divided by 1, or just 2 pi. And phase shift. Now, because I have x plus pi over 4 inside the parentheses, remember that is a shift left. Pi over 4. Okay, so it's a shift left pi over 4, which means my phase shift is technically referred to as negative pi over 4, or my very first x value, or the beginning of my cycle, will be at negative pi over 4. That's the x value. Okay, there is nothing being added or subtracted out here, so we have no vertical shift, so my midline is the x-axis. Okay. All right, so let's find those x values of my 5 key points. So my first x value, let me start here a little bit. My first x value then is the phase shift, so remember that. Called the PS. All right, so the phase shift is negative pi over 4. Okay. Now, where is my last x value going to be at the end of the cycle? All right, so what do we have to do? We have to take negative pi over 4 and add the period. The period is 2 pi. So I'm taking negative pi over 4, adding the cycle will end at 7 pi over 4. Okay, now you might be comfortable with just coming up with the midpoint. So you're basically saying what's halfway between -1 and 7. So if you average those, -1 plus 7 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. So the midpoint should be at 3 pi over 4. And then you could do the same thing. What's halfway between -1 and 3? Add those. -1 plus 3 is 2 pi over 4. Half of 2 is 1 pi over 4. And then halfway between 3 and 7 is 5 pi over 4. If that doesn't work for you, you can always use the quarter period. So we could say, okay, what's the quarter period? What's 1/4 of the period? And the period is 2 pi. So what's 1/4 of 2 pi? Which is 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2. So sometimes I like to leave it not reduced when I'm having to find those x values. I want my units to be in the same, or my fraction to be in the same units as the phase shift so that I can add. So basically you're adding 2 pi over 4 each time, which is pi over 2. So -1 pi over 4 plus 2 pi over 4 is 1 pi over 4. Plus 2 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. Plus 2 pi over 4 is 5 pi over 4, and plus 2 is 7. So you have to come up with the method that works best for you. So this is my quarter point and my 3/4 point, whatever you want to label those, is fine with me. Okay, so we're going to mark the x-axis. So here I'm at -pi over 4. So each square is 1 pi over 4. So this is 0, right? So this is going to be 1 pi over 4, 1 to the right, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. So we have to make sure we're consistent. Notice how one square to the left is 1 pi over 4 and one to the right is 1 pi over 4. All right, now let's label the y-axis. We have no vertical shift, so all of our our first cycle of this sine graph will begin, middle, and end on the x-axis. The amplitude is 3, so I will go from the x-axis, I'll go up 3, which would be my highest point, and down 3, which would be my lowest point. So I label those. Now you just have to be careful here that you start at the phase shift. So at -pi over 4, the graph of sine is on the midline, which is the x-axis. At 1 pi over 4, which is the quarter, we're up at the max. 3 pi over 4 is our midpoint, we're back at the midline. 5 pi over 4 is our 3/4 point, we're down at the min. And 7 pi over 4 is our ending value, we're back at the midline. And there's the first cycle of this function.